She was 7 years old, standing in a freezing alley at midnight, watching her mother pull food from a dumpster. When her mother handed her a bread roll, the little girl didn't eat it. She tore it in half and whispered, "This half is for tomorrow, Mama." She was 7, and she already knew that no one was coming to help them. Her own father had thrown them out and told the whole world a lie so cruel that even her grandmother turned her back on them. But what that man didn't know was that the wrong person had just seen everything. And what happens next is a story you will never forget. The alley behind House of Bellavita Kitchen smelled like cold garlic and wet concrete. It was 11:40 on a Tuesday night in November, and the temperature had dropped below freezing 2 hours ago. The restaurant's back door was propped open with a cinder block, leaking a ribbon of yellow light across the dumpsters. The kitchen crew had already gone home. The only sound was the low hum of the walk-in cooler and the scrape of something moving near the trash. Callum Rourke noticed the sound before he saw anything. He was standing at the far end of the alley, his back against the brick wall, finishing a cigarette he didn't even want. He'd stepped out of a meeting at the social club 3 doors down, a meeting about money, about territory, about a man who owed more than he could pay. The usual business, on the kind of conversation that left a metallic taste in his mouth, no matter how many times he had it. He wasn't in a hurry to go back inside. Then he heard it again, a rustle, a small, careful sound near the dumpsters. Callum didn't move. He was a man who had survived 43 years in a world that killed careless people, and the first rule he'd ever learned was simple: watch before you act. So he watched. A woman crouched near the larger of the 2 dumpsters. She had pulled the lid open just enough to reach inside, and her arm was buried to the elbow in garbage bags. Her coat was thin, too thin for November, and her dark hair was pulled back in a loose knot that had started to come undone hours ago. She moved quickly, but quietly, like someone who had already been chased away from places like this before. And then Callum saw the second figure. A little girl, small, maybe 6 or 7 years old, standing 2 feet behind the woman with her arms wrapped around herself. She wore a puffy jacket that was zipped all the way to her chin, but it was a summer jacket, the kind meant for cool evenings in September, not the dead weight of a November night. Her sneakers had no socks visible above them. She was shivering, but she wasn't making a sound. The woman pulled something from the dumpster, a bread roll, still in its paper wrapper. She turned and handed it to the girl with a whisper that Callum couldn't hear. The little girl took it with both hands, looked at it, and then, instead of eating it, she carefully tore it in half and held one piece back toward her mother. Callum's cigarette burned down to the filter. He didn't feel it, and the woman shook her head. She pushed the girl's hand back gently and whispered something else. The girl hesitated, then took a small bite of her half. She chewed slowly, like she was trying to make it last. Then she slipped the other half into the pocket of her jacket. She was saving it. A 7-year-old girl, standing in a freezing alley behind a restaurant, was saving half a bread roll she'd pulled from the garbage because she didn't know when she'd eat again. Callum Rourke had seen violence. He had ordered it, received it, and survived it more times than he could count. He had watched men beg. He had watched men lie. He had sat across from people in the worst moments of their lives and felt nothing more than the cold arithmetic of consequence. But something about the way that little girl put the bread in her pocket, carefully, like it was something precious, cracked open a door inside him that he had sealed shut 6 years ago. And behind that door was a memory he could not afford to revisit. Not here, not now. He stepped back into the shadow and kept watching. The woman found a styrofoam container next. She opened it, smelled it, and closed it again quickly. Whatever was inside had turned. She set it on the ground and kept searching. The little girl stayed perfectly still, watching her mother with eyes that were too alert, too serious for a child her age. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't complaining. She was standing guard. Callum recognized that look, and he had seen it on the faces of boys who grew up in his neighborhood, children who learned too early that the world was not a safe place, and that the only person they could depend on was standing right in front of them. But those were boys who'd been hardened by the streets, by absent fathers and overworked mothers and a system that had written them off before they turned 10. This was a little girl in a jacket with flowers on it, standing next to a dumpster, protecting her mother from nothing and everything at the same time. The woman found another container. Pasta, it looked like, and this one passed whatever test she'd been applying. She closed it gently, tucked it under her arm, and reached back inside for more. Her movements were getting faster now, more desperate. Callum could see her hands shaking, and he didn't think it was just from the cold. Then the back door of the restaurant swung open wider, and a busboy stepped out with 2 trash bags. He was young, maybe 19, wearing a stained apron and earbuds. He didn't see the woman at first. He swung the first bag toward the dumpster, and it hit the lid with a clang that echoed off the alley walls. The little girl flinched so hard her whole body jerked backward, not a normal flinch, not the kind of startled reaction any child might have to a loud noise. This was something deeper, something trained into her nervous system by repetition. She flinched, the way people flinch when they've learned that loud sounds are followed by pain. The busboy saw the woman then. He stopped, looked at her, looked at the girl, and his expression cycled through confusion, pity, and discomfort in the space of 2 seconds. "Hey," he said. "You can't be back here." The woman straightened up. She held the styrofoam container against her chest like a shield. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "We're leaving." "I mean, I don't make the rules," the busboy said, already stepping back toward the door. "But my manager's still here and he'll call the cops. Just, you know." "I understand." The woman reached for her daughter's hand. "Come on, Elise." The girl took her mother's hand. She didn't look at the busboy. She didn't look at the restaurant. She kept her eyes on the ground and walked close to her mother's side, matching her stride step for step, like she'd practiced this retreat before. They moved toward the mouth of the alley. The woman's head was down. Her shoulders were drawn in tight. Everything about her posture said the same thing. "Please don't look at me." They were 10 feet from Callum when he spoke. "Wait." The woman stopped instantly. Her grip on her daughter's hand tightened. She turned just enough to see him, a tall man in a dark coat stepping out of the shadow near the wall, and her face went rigid with fear. She pulled her daughter behind her in one swift motion, putting her own body between the child and the stranger. "Who are you?" she said. There was no tremble in her voice, despite everything, the hunger, the cold, the humiliation of being caught digging through garbage. Her voice was steel. Callum raised both hands slightly. Open palms. The universal gesture of someone who is not reaching for anything. "I'm nobody you need to be afraid of," he said. The woman didn't move. And her eyes scanned him. The coat, the shoes, the watch on his wrist. And Callum could see her calculating. Expensive clothes, standing alone in an alley near midnight. This was not a man who belonged to her world, and she knew it. "We don't need anything," she said. Behind her, the little girl, Elise, peered around her mother's hip. Her eyes found Callum's face and held there. And she didn't speak. She just looked at him with an expression that was half curiosity and half the quiet wariness of an animal that had been cornered before. "You don't need anything," Callum repeated. He kept his voice low, even, no authority in it, no edge, just words. "That styrofoam box you're carrying, what's in it?" The woman's jaw tightened. She didn't answer. "Because if it's the rigatoni from tonight's special, it's actually not bad," Callum said. But the chicken from yesterday would have been thrown out around 8, and that's been sitting in there for almost 4 hours. I wouldn't eat that." The woman stared at him. Something shifted in her face. Not trust, not yet, but a fracture in the wall she'd built around herself. The kind of crack that appears when someone says something so unexpectedly human that the prepared defenses don't know how to respond. "How do you know what they serve here?" she asked. "I own the building." Silence. The alley seemed to get colder. The little girl tugged on her mother's coat. "Mama," she whispered. "I'm okay, we can go." It was the way she said it, not pleading, not whining, a 7-year-old child reassuring her mother that she could handle being hungry for one more night, because she could see that her mother was scared. And she didn't want to make things worse. Callum felt the door inside him crack open another inch. Behind it, a voice he hadn't heard in 6 years, small, certain, brave in the way that only children can be, said almost the same words. "I'm okay, Daddy. We can go." He closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, his voice was different, quieter, not the voice of a man who owned buildings and sat in meetings about territory. The voice of someone standing at the edge of a wound that had never healed. "The restaurant's closed," he said, "but the kitchen's still warm. There's food that hasn't been thrown out yet. Real food. Oh, on plates. If you want to come inside, you can eat. Both of you. No conditions, no questions." The woman shook her head. "We don't take..." "It's not charity," Callum said. And he wasn't sure why he said it that way, or why it mattered to frame it that way. But he could see the pride in her posture, rigid and unyielding even as her body shook from the cold, and he understood that pride was the last thing she had left. He would not ask her to surrender it. "It's Tuesday night," he continued. "Whatever's left in the kitchen gets tossed. You'd be saving me from wasting it." The woman looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were dark and exhausted and full of the kind of suspicion that comes from being let down so many times that kindness itself feels like a trap. Then Elise spoke again, not to her mother, to Callum. "Do you have soup?" she asked. Her voice was so small it almost disappeared into the cold air. Callum looked down at her. She was watching him with those two old eyes. And her hands balled into fists inside her jacket sleeves, her small face pale in the dim light. She had asked a question that was so simple, so ordinary, and so heartbreaking in context that it landed in Callum's chest like a fist. "Yeah," he said. "I think there's soup." Elise looked up at her mother. She didn't say, "Please." She didn't beg. She just looked, and in that look was everything a child shouldn't have to communicate at 7 years old. "I'm hungry. I'm cold. I'm tired of pretending I'm not." The woman's composure broke, not dramatically. No sobbing, no collapse. Just a single breath that came out shaking, and a slight drop of her shoulders, and a nod so small it might have been imagined. "Okay," she said. "Okay." The kitchen of House of Bellavita was exactly as Callum had described it. Warm. And the industrial ovens had been turned off, but the residual heat still hung in the air like a blanket. Stainless steel counters gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The floor had been mopped. Everything was clean and quiet and safe in a way that felt almost violent compared to the alley outside. Callum moved through the kitchen with a familiarity that surprised the woman. He pulled a large pot from the walk-in cooler, minestrone, still warm enough that it only needed a few minutes on the stove. He found bread in a basket near the prep station, a block of parmesan, a bowl of olives. He set everything on the counter with the efficiency of someone who had done this before, though not recently, and not for strangers. Elise sat on a stool at the prep counter, her legs dangling. She watched Callum with open fascination, and her fear fading in increments as the warmth of the kitchen seeped into her skin. Her mother stood near the door, arms crossed, watching both of them. "I'm Vivian," the woman said abruptly, like she'd made a decision. "Viv." Callum set a bowl in front of Elise and ladled soup into it. Steam rose between them. "Callum," he said, "and this is Elise." "I know," he said. "I heard you in the alley." Elise picked up the spoon. She looked at the soup, then at her mother, then back at the soup. She took one careful sip, then at another. Then her eyes closed, and for a moment her whole body seemed to relax, shoulders dropping, fists unclenching, the constant low-grade tension that she carried like a second skin, finally loosening its grip. "It's good," Elise whispered. Callum set a second bowl in front of Vivian. She hesitated, and he didn't push. He simply turned around to find a glass and filled it with water from the tap. "When did you last eat?" he asked. His back was to her. The question was casual, conversational, directed at no one in particular. Vivienne picked up the spoon. "Yesterday," she said. "Morning." "And her?" "She ate yesterday too. I made sure she ate first." Callum set the water on the counter. He didn't sit down. He leaned against the opposite counter and crossed his arms, giving them space. Giving her room to eat without being watched. "How long have you been on the street?" he asked. Vivian's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down. 11 days. "Where were you before?" "Mr. Rourke." "Callum." "Callum." She pressed her lips together. "You said no questions." "I did." He paused. "But I'm asking anyway." "Well, you can choose not to answer." Vivian looked at her daughter. Elise was eating steadily now, focused entirely on the soup, bread clutched in her other hand. She wasn't listening, or she was listening but had learned not to show it. "My husband threw us out," Vivian said. The words came out flat, practiced, like she'd said them before, to someone, a shelter intake worker, a hotline volunteer, a stranger on a park bench, and had learned to strip them of all emotion, so she could get through the sentence without breaking. 11 days ago, my husband told me to leave the house. He'd changed the locks while I was picking Elise up from school. Our things were in garbage bags on the front porch. He had a lawyer on the phone. He told me if I didn't leave quietly, he'd call the police and tell them I was trespassing. Trespassing? Yeah, in your own home. His name is on the deed. He made sure of that when we bought it. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I trusted him. She said the word trusted like it was a bone she'd broken and never set properly. He told me he had proof that I'd been unfaithful, that he'd found messages on my phone, that he'd spoken to the man I was supposedly seeing. "Were you?" Vivian's eyes snapped to his. "No." One word, no elaboration, no defense, just the truth, offered without apology. Callum believed her. He wasn't sure why. He'd spent a lifetime reading lies, and the best liars he'd ever met could look you dead in the eye and sell you fiction with the conviction of a priest. But there was something in the way Vivian said that single word that left no room for doubt. She wasn't defending herself. She was stating a fact. In the way you might say, the sky is blue or the ground is beneath your feet. She was past the point of caring whether anyone believed her. He fabricated everything, Vivian continued, her voice thinning. Screenshots, text messages from a number I'd never seen. He showed them to my mother. He showed them to my sister. He called my friends. He posted on social media, not directly, just enough. Vague posts about betrayal and heartbreak, enough that people filled in the blanks. People believed him. Everyone believed him. She picked up her spoon again but didn't eat. She just held it, staring at the surface of the soup. Garrett has always been charming, likable, the kind of man who remembers people's birthdays and holds doors open and coaches Little League. Everyone loves Garrett. And you. I was the quiet one. The one who stayed home. The one nobody really knew because I was always behind him, always in his shadow. So when he said I'd cheated on him, it was easy. It was easy for people to believe because I wasn't real enough to them to defend. Callum was quiet for a moment. In the silence, Elise finished her soup and reached for the bread. She tore off a piece, ate it, and then, again, slipped a piece into her jacket pocket. The same pocket where she'd put the bread from the alley. Vivian saw it. Her face tightened, and she looked away quickly, pressing her fingers against her eyes. She didn't cry, but the effort of not crying was visible in every line of her body. "Baby," Vivian said softly, "you don't have to save it, there's more." Elise looked at her mother, then she looked at the bread basket, half full on the counter. And something in her expression said she didn't believe it, that she understood abundance was temporary, that what was here now might not be here tomorrow. And the only safe thing to do was to prepare for the worst, while the worst wasn't happening. "I know," Elise said. But she didn't take the bread out of her pocket. Callum turned around and opened the walk-in cooler. He stood inside it for 10 seconds longer than he needed to. It wasn't because he was looking for something. It was because he needed a moment alone with the feeling that had settled in his chest. Heavy, sharp, familiar. His daughter's name had been Rosie. She was 5 when she died. An accident. Wrong place, wrong time. A car that ran a red light on a Tuesday afternoon while Callum's wife, Angela, was crossing the street with their daughter's hand in hers. Yeah, Angela survived. Rosie didn't. And Angela never forgave herself, and Callum never forgave the world, and the marriage collapsed under the weight of a grief that was too enormous for two people to carry together, so they each carried it alone and separately, which meant they carried it forever. Rosie used to save crackers in her pockets. Animal crackers. She'd eat two and save the rest for later, not because she was hungry, but because she liked knowing they were there, a 5-year-old's version of securities. Angela used to find crumbs in the laundry and laugh about it. Nobody had laughed about it in 6 years. Callum came out of the cooler with a container of tiramisu. He set it on the counter next to Elise. "Dessert," he said. His voice was steady. No one would have known anything had happened behind the cooler door. And Elise's eyes went wide. She looked at the tiramisu, then at Callum, then at her mother, and for the first time since he'd seen her in the alley, the wariness left her face entirely. Just for a second. Just long enough for her to look like what she actually was. A 7-year-old girl who had been offered something sweet after 11 days of nothing. "Really?" she said. "Really?" She picked up a spoon and took a small, careful bite. Cocoa powder dusted her upper lip. She didn't wipe it away. She just looked at Callum with an expression that was closer to wonder than anything else and said, "Thank you." 2 words, nothing more. But Callum Rourke, who had sat across from judges and prosecutors and men who wanted him dead and felt nothing, had to turn away from a 7-year-old girl to keep his composure. And he made a phone call while they ate. He stepped into the dining room, dark, chairs stacked on tables, and called a woman named Grace Pellegrino. Grace ran a property management company that handled several of Callum's buildings. She was efficient, discreet, and asked no questions that weren't directly related to square footage and lease terms. "The apartment on Ashford," he said. "The 2-bedroom above the bookstore. Is it still empty?" "Since October," Grace said. "Why? I have a viewing scheduled Thursday." "Cancel it. I need it furnished by tomorrow afternoon. Clean sheets, towels, food in the refrigerator, enough for a woman and a young child." A pause. "Is this a relocation situation?" "It's a favor." Another pause. Grace had been working with Callum for 12 years. And she knew the weight of his pauses and the economy of his words. "I'll have it ready by 2, she said. "One more thing. There's a school, Whitmore Elementary, on 6th. I need to know the enrollment process, what paperwork is needed, how fast it can happen." Callum. "That's it, Grace." "Thank you." He hung up and stood in the dark restaurant for a moment. Through the kitchen door, he could hear Elise saying something to her mother, too quiet to make out, and Vivian's low, murmured response. They sounded like 2 people at the end of a very long day, which, Callum supposed, they were. They'd been at the end of a very long day for 11 days straight. He went back in. Vivian had finished eating. She was sitting straight again, her composure reassembled, her walls rebuilt. And she looked at him with an expression that Callum recognized from his own mirror. The face of someone who accepts help, but is already preparing for the moment it's taken away. "Oh, we should go," she said. "We've taken enough of your time." "Where?" She didn't answer. "There's a shelter on Greenpoint," he said. "But it's full most nights by 9. The one on Atlantic has beds, but they separate mothers from children over 5. So where exactly are you going?" Vivian's chin lifted. "We'll manage." "I don't doubt that you'll manage. You've been managing for 11 days. You'll probably manage for 11 more, and then 20 more after that. And your daughter will learn to manage too. Oh, she'll learn that food comes from garbage, and sleep comes in doorways, and the world is a place where managing is the best she can hope for." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Or you can let me help, tonight, and we can figure the rest out tomorrow." "Why?" Vivian's voice cracked on the word. The first real crack. "Why do you care? You don't know us. You don't know me." Callum looked at Elise. She had fallen asleep on the counter, her head on her folded arms, the spoon still in her hand. Cocoa powder was still on her lip. In sleep, she looked her actual age, small and fragile and utterly dependent on adults who had, so far, almost universally failed her. "I had a daughter," Callum said. "She'd have been about Elisa's age." Had. The past tense hung in the air between them. Vivian looked at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't seen before. Not the expensive coat, not the watch, not the careful authority in his voice. She saw grief. Old grief, the kind that doesn't go away because you don't talk about it, the kind that lives in the bones. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't offer sympathy. She simply nodded, a small knowing nod, and said, "Okay, okay. I'll accept your help tonight, just tonight. That's all I'm offering." It was a lie and they both knew it, but it was the kind of lie that allowed two proud, wounded people to move forward without admitting that something had already shifted between them. Something that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with recognition. The apartment on Ashford Street was above a used bookstore called Foxglove and Company. It had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, hardwood floors that creaked near the bathroom, and windows that looked out onto a quiet side street lined with maples. Grace had moved fast. The place smelled like fresh linen and pine cleaner when Callum unlocked the door the next afternoon. He'd driven Vivienne and Elise to a motel the night before. Nothing fancy, just clean and warm and safe, with a lock on the door and a bed that didn't come with conditions. He'd paid for 3 nights and left his phone number on a piece of paper on the nightstand. "In case you need anything," he said, and left before she could argue. She called the next morning, not to ask for anything, just to say that Elise had slept through the night for the first time in 11 days. That she'd woken up and asked if the soup place was real, or if she'd dreamed it. One that she'd eaten the bread from her pocket for breakfast before Vivienne could stop her, and then been confused when Vivienne told her there was more food at the front desk, a continental breakfast, juice and muffins and fruit, and that she could eat as much as she wanted. "She didn't believe me," Vivienne said on the phone. Her voice was different, still tired, still guarded, but with something underneath, the faintest pulse of something that might have been relief. "She thought I was joking." Callum was standing in his office when she told him that. He was looking out the window at the river. His hand tightened on the phone, and he said nothing for a moment, because there was nothing to say that would be adequate. "Bring her to Ashford Street this afternoon," he said. "There's an apartment you can use." "Callum, it's empty." "No one's using it. You'd be doing me a favor. Empty units get broken into." She knew it was another gentle lie. But she came anyway. The first week was about survival. Vivienne slept 12 hours a night for 3 days straight, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion it had been holding at bay. Elise explored the apartment with careful, methodical attention, opening every cabinet, checking every closet, counting the towels and the forks and the cans in the pantry. She was taking inventory, cataloging resources, making sure she knew exactly what was available, because somewhere deep in her 7-year-old mind, she still believed it could all disappear. Callum kept his distance. He checked in once a day, a text, a phone call, a brief visit to drop off groceries. He didn't push. He didn't ask about the husband. He didn't try to fix anything that hadn't been asked to be fixed. He simply made sure they had what they needed, and then stepped back. It was Vivienne who eventually broke the silence about Garrett. She was sitting on the apartment's small balcony on the 7th day after Elise had gone to bed, when Callum stopped by with a bag of clothes that Grace had assembled. Winter jackets, boots, warm socks, a backpack for Elise. Vivienne took the bag, set it aside, and then came back to the balcony and sat down in the cold air. "He planned it for months," she said, as if they were in the middle of a conversation that had never stopped. Callum leaned against the railing. He didn't sit. He just listened. "I keep going back over it, trying to find the moment it started, and I think it was around March, last March. Then he started working late. Not every night, but 2 or 3 times a week, and he said there was a new project at the firm, a restructuring, and he needed to be there for the analysts. I believed him because I had no reason not to. We'd been married for 8 years. 8 years, Callum. I never once questioned where he was." She paused. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. "Then in the summer he started picking fights, small ones. He'd criticize the way I loaded the dishwasher. He'd say I spent too much time at the gym and not enough time with Elise, which was absurd, because I arranged my entire schedule around her. He was building a case. I see that now. He was creating a history of conflict, a pattern, so that when he finally made his move, and it would look like the marriage had been deteriorating for months. And in a way it had, because he was making it deteriorate. Classic setup, Callum said quietly. Vivian looked at him. You recognize it? I've seen men do worse for less. She nodded, as if this confirmation, from a man who had clearly seen the full spectrum of human manipulation, validated something she'd been trying to tell herself for weeks. The messages he showed everyone, they were real messages, from a real phone number, but I never sent them. He created an account, a fake contact. He spent weeks writing conversations with himself, making it look like I was having an affair with someone from my gym. He was meticulous about it. The messages referenced real places. The coffee shop near the gym, a restaurant I'd mentioned wanting to try, and inside jokes that he wove in to make them seem authentic. He even timed the messages to correspond with the hours when I was actually at the gym, so if anyone checked my schedule, it would align. He even created a fake social media profile for this person, photos of a real man I don't even know who. Just someone whose pictures he downloaded from a travel blog. Attractive, fit, the kind of man that would make the story believable. He gave him a name, a job, a history. He built an entire human being out of nothing, and then he built an affair between that person and me. Why? Because he wanted Tessa Whitford. She's his co-worker. 28 years old. No children, no complications. They'd been together for at least a year. I found that out after he threw us out, when a mutual friend finally told me what she'd been too afraid to say for months. But Garrett didn't want to be the man who left his wife and child for another woman. That would damage his reputation, his image. He's a deacon at our church. He coaches youth basketball. He volunteers at the food bank every Thanksgiving. He's built an entire public identity as the dependable, upstanding family man, and he wasn't willing to sacrifice that. He needed me to be the villain. The cruelest part, Vivian continued, her voice dropping, is that he was patient about it. He didn't rush. He laid the groundwork for months, and then, on the day he decided to act, he did everything at once, changed the locks, packed our things, called my mother, my sister, our friends. By the time I picked Elise up from school and drove home, my entire life had been disassembled. Every relationship, every safety net, every place I could have turned, he had gotten there first. I walked up to my own front door, carrying my daughter's backpack, and the key didn't work, and there were garbage bags on the porch, and my phone was already ringing with my mother's number.